Hey, I've just been reviewing over in psychological types and still feeling energy and want to open something new at the same time as trying to finish off that present work with Jung. And so, well, Robert Avens, the new Gnosis, Heidegger, Hillman, and Angels, I found to be rich and evocative and also small enough that I can get through this hopefully without spending too long. So we're going to be exploring that, namely today in the introduction. And so I would recommend, maybe some facility with knowing who Heidegger is, who James Hillman is, um, Google a definition of gnosis. And so I'm more or less going to be moving straight into this. So it's a little philosophical today. But I mean, it's also in the context, I should say. I mean, I've just been articulating a lot of like why soul work, particularly is connected with the function of symbols and perspective taking in the context of an ecology of practices is important. And it's essentially this conception of like heaven and human and then earthly, or body, soul, and spirit. And there's a notion, a sense that the soul and the world of the soul inhabits a between space. And using the language of Avens and the people that he's exploring, we get to get a lot more color on that and start to understand what is meant by gnosis. What is this? What is the imaginal world and the between space between the idea and the thing. To understand that distinction better, that's, you know, well published everywhere, but in my psychological type series in episodes 2 and 21. Okay. So we're talking about gnosis. We're going to draw a lot on Henry Corbin. A little bit about Corbin here is that he was made famous by, yeah, revealing and revalorizing a little known Islamic philosophical tradition, Ishmaelism or Ismailism, and esoteric trends in ancient and medieval Iran. And so Corbyn's areas of investigation included Gnosis, Hermeticism, Jewish mysticism, Jacob Boehme, Manuel Swedenborg, and Heidegger. There's a pivotal figure in Corbyn's writings named Surawadi from 1155, 1191, who revived in Iran the wisdom of the ancient Persians in their doctrine of light and darkness. There was an original feature of his work, the interpretation of Platonic ideas in terms of Zoroastrian angels. The connection for me is that Ion, namely of Jung's book, is a Zoroastrian angel, I believe. And so through by following Surawadi, apologies for mispronunciation, Corbin was basically able to introduce this conception of a third world that I speak of. And it's the world of these archetypal figures or angels, but it's the also it goes by the name Mundus Imaginalis. That's the Latin, or the ala mythal, which is again lying between the world of the intelligibles or ideas and the realm of sensible things. And the quote, the kind of knowledge appropriate to this intermediary world is visionary perception or imagination or inner revelation. And so we're using the term imaginal here in order to distinguish from the imaginary, meaning the fictitious or unreal. So what we're really talking about is real spiritual experience, which is a kind of event of the soul that by definition is not open to common sensory observation and can be shared only by those who participate in similar spiritual experiences. Yeah, so there's a kind of for Corbyn, sorry, no, the author Avens is saying that there's a kind of common denominator uniting Jung, Hillman, and Corbyn, and a concern with the development of a sense of soul and the cultivation of imagination. So that was a little bit about the relevance of Corbyn. We now go into a little bit of what is gnosis, right? Since that's what we're talking about. Historically, we could, I mean, this is just in the text. I mean, there's a lot of publications about it. Viveki's episode, I think it's 18, in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, is obviously directly relevant. It's the esoteric element in the official or exoteric religious traditions of the world. It's about direct experience, direct knowledge of the divine. I'll do a little, I'll read the second footnote because it is relevant. So basically saying that there was a, if we're talking about Gnosticism, it's a kind of historical movement that flourished before, during, after the rise of Christianity, which is a kind of radical dualism, um, saying that there's like two divine beings, a good God and an evil demiurge. Um, so that the good, where instead of, what we see in the Bible, the good God didn't produce the world and he doesn't rule over it. Instead, the demiurge is a kind of inferior God who is responsible for the creation of this world and the calamities that issue from this act. So Gnosticism sees us as a kind of divine spark that's been misplaced into this world, spark or pneuma. And the goal is to break free from this mortal encasement and to soar back to the Empyrean realm from which we came. Hans Jonas is good on this. But when kind of not, that's a historical view on what is Gnosticism. We're wanting to talk about gnosis, which is the real content. And again, this is following Viveki. We're trying to not adopt these very enticing stories that we see in the Matrix, for example, expressed all through literature and like that. But what is gnosis? Can we grip gnosis? Can we get a grip on gnosis? So, but if we're going to be exploring Heidegger and Hillman, we have to break down a little bit what we think of as philosophy. So, what Avens is saying here, page 7, is that we're talking about a certain style of thinking or a certain way of, a certain manner of consciousness, rather than about certain opinions or certain views about the world. It's not necessarily, yeah, this is a sort of philosophy that's not kind of necessarily aiming toward ultimate coherence. It's more about experiencing, but not subjectively either, not merely subjectively. I mean, Avon says they're trying to sort of lead us nowhere in the Buddhist sense. Yeah, they're thinkers that arise in a time when the gods have fled. In Heidegger's phrase, they're thinkers of a needy time, the time of the gods who have fled and of the God that is coming. The idea is that there's a between stage between the death of God, thank you, Nietzsche, when we moved into existentialism and then postmodernism and nihilism and phenomenology is going along with that. And Heidegger and Hillman arise in that time to guide us toward the God who is in the process of being reborn. And getting a sense of gnosis is helping us to navigate during that time. We can understand that, according to Avens, the gods are only absent in our time as literalized or hypostatized entities, providing security for the ego. He was quoting that this is the time after this is when sort of, as Yeats quoted, the center cannot hold and mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. But then Avens is wanting to say that anarchy originally means no arche or beginning, no beginning. So in the sense of the absence of the gods as literalized or hypostatized entities, there's a way that our beginning, our foundational structures, for example, if we have a cosmology of there was a Big Bang and like that, it doesn't involve any gods. There's no gods in that, the foundations of our cosmology at the beginning. Anyway, now we start to treat what is gnosis. He quotes Keats, negative capability. It's a capacity to be with uncertainty, with mystery, with doubt. It's a kind of, according to Keats, it's a kind of imaginative questioning that's more rewarding than finding facts or finding reasons. So this is where we can start to see that there's a kind of knowing that we can only find when we can be that which we wish to know. In the Platonic tradition, like can only be known by like. And so this is a kind of, again, through Viveki, Eric Pearl's thinking being, it's kind of this correspondence between knowledge and being, existing. When we say knowledge, I think for me, this is the biblical sense of to know, you know, uh, where Evans has said knowledge or thinking is inseparable from being and vice versa. But I'm saying like knowledge is really not the same as thinking, not at all. So we're talking about a kind of existential knowing, which is a knowing in our whole being, not not knowing that comes through propositions necessarily. It's a kind of existential awareness, or I would connect pure suchness. So this is one of the characterizations of gnosis. There's going to be three. That was the first of three. It's between belief and reason, between faith and reason. In Corbyn's view, what's been overlooked is that between believing and knowing, there's a third mediating term, which is a kind of inner vision. I quote, an intermediate and mediating world forgotten by the official philosophy and theology of our times, the Mundus Imaginalis, the imaginal world. So for Corbyn, this Corbyn's Mundus Imaginalis is a kind of necessary mediatrix. I have to start defining some of this because I can't just whip out all this language. Yeah. Mediatrix is a noun for a woman who acts as a mediator, intermediary, or go-between. I might invite, yeah, I mean, if there's obviously terms that I'm using that you're not familiar with, Google them because I'm not going to stop and Google all the time. So yeah, the again, this is where we see through Jung the soul as psychopomp, soul as mediating figure. It's a feminine, it has a feminine quality. So Corbyn's Mundus Imaginalis, imaginal world, is a necessary mediatrix, theologically conceived as the Deus Revelatus or the revealed God, And that revealed God is between the hidden God, Deus absconditus, and man's world. So again, where the essence of religion is kind of not of this world, going up to the one, to the hidden God, and you know, the incarnation of the Nazarene being like down and among the people of this world. And there's this reciprocal process that's going on there between up and away toward the hidden God and down and among the creatures of this world. And the idea is that there is a revealed God. This is in a kind of between space, the imaginal world. And so that's the world of the soul or the psyche. And in the Platonic and esoteric tradition, and I'm essentially just like reading and commenting here in deep dialogue with this, taking a lot from Avens here. In the Platonic and esoteric tradition, that is the anima mundi, the soul of the world. There might be some future distinctions there where the world of the soul or psyche might not be the same as the soul of the world. At the moment, we're talking about this between space, the world that the soul inhabits, and the ensouled world. And so gnosis, and again, this is the second of three characterizations, has to do with the cultivation of the soul. It's we could say, the unveiling or unconcealing of this between space, this ensouled world. We're following a kind of Socratic commandment to give attention to the soul. Obviously, through Jung, we have the risk of being enamored by the soul, which would result in anima possession. I mean, in the story of Prometheus and Pandora, we're relating that through psychological types, that it was Prometheus' connection with his own inner divinity that allowed him to connect with the divine quality of his soul. Their sort of profane or mortal relationship between Prometheus and Pandora was mirrored by a divine relationship between Vulcan and Minerva, Hephaestus and Athena. And so this Socratic commandment, give attention to the soul, through Jung, we see that was the real secret of the Gnostics, that the psyche existed as a source of knowledge just as much as it did for the alchemists. So it's within our own being, within our own quality of ensoulment, connection with our own soul, that we can derive knowledge, spiritual knowledge, in the form of direct experience or gnosis. Avens draws on a contemporary Gnostic Jacob Mielman to talk about the connection between it being about self-attention, or like it's the kind of this distinction between faith and reason. Um, it's not about that, but it's more about being between thought and emotion. Sorry, it's actually not about that either. It's more about having attention directed toward oneself. And that was from Needleman. And to me, this would be kind of, I don't see what that has to do. Yes, self-knowledge in the sense of self-reflectiveness, but self-attention can also be kind of neurotic narcissism. And obviously, development of soul implies a certain quality of spontaneity that this is Jungian extroversion or the quality of the divine child in that phase of the transcendent function. And so it's a kind of disinhibited quality, not inhibiting oneself. And that kind of quality is anathema to self-attention. It's when we're in a creative flow state of being able to be in soul and create from out of our soul, self-attention and self-consciousness kind of disappear in that state. Anyway, so then we move to our third characterization of gnosis. It's a kind of salvational or redemptive knowledge because it has the virtue of bringing about an inner transformation, knowledge that changes and transformed the knowing subject. So again, these three qualities, a knowing which is existential, a convergence between being and knowing, a quality of cultivation of soul, and a transformative knowledge. These are three aspects of gnosis. Needleman says that gnosis is a kind of search for knowledge conducted with such all-round intensity that this search itself becomes an ontologically transforming force. So it unites practice and theory. In Blake's terms, as a man is, so he sees. As a man is, so he sees. So when we connect, like being knowing, it's a kind of knowledge that we experience ourselves in the heart of our being. It's not just about reaching or trying to get somewhere, it's about being that which we are. But there is a developmental or cultivating quality, and so it's not just an existential being, it's a being in the soul, being as the soul, inhabiting the world from the perspective of our soul. And that by doing so, we are changed in some way, and that things change by inhabiting that space. That means that it involves desire because there is an intensity of searching. Eros is involved. Intention is involved. The search has intent. One of the paradoxes here is that gnosis is the search for itself and that which is found within the search. So the intent is to find some knowledge. There's obviously a quality of becoming, so it has a developmental aspect. When we say salvational or redemptive knowledge, and that's transformative, I don't think we can avoid a heart-centered quality there. That comes out more in a minute right now. But it also involves, there's a lot of energy going on in this kind of transformative search and finding, obviously involving the quality of imagination. The word intermediary comes up. It's a between space and a bridging, flowing, breathing, dynamic quality. But it also has a meditational dimension, gnosis. So we're going to draw a little from Islamic Sufism here to try and get more at this. What is gnosis? So we're talking about a kind of salvational knowledge, or in that tradition, gnosis kardias, wisdom of the heart. So himma in Islamic Sufism, it's a kind of locus of spiritual energy of imagination or spiritual perception. So it's a kind of active meditating or imagining or projecting or ardently desiring. This is where I drew some of this. It's a combination of all of this cloud of associations that I've been making. Quote, the energy of himma is said to be so powerful as to project extra psychic being external to the person who is in the condition of himma. So the connection here is that gnosis is a kind of knowledge, it's a kind of heart-centered knowledge. It's a knowing by being, which in Islamic Sufism is a kind of connected with the act of meditating, imagining, projecting, ardently desiring. Yeah, so this quality of projection, so this quality, this condition, the state of being himma, creates as real the figures of the imagination. But their reality isn't, so it's not just about finding, it's about making real. But the reality of these figures of the imagination is not hallucinatory, or illusory, nor are they subjectively or objectively real. These are figures or beings which inhabit a between space. Again, so it's about being in the imaginal world, the world between ideas and things, inhabiting that world from out of the perspective of the soul. And then this whole cloud of associations comes up. It's a transformative space. It's a space of knowing by being that involves the cultivation of the soul. And when we connect with this tone from Islamic Sufism, we get a meditational and projective, desiring quality that is about creating. And it's creating by projecting beings into this imaginal space between ideas and things, the imaginal world. And they're not objectively or subjectively real. They belong to an intermediary and mediating realm of the Mundus Imaginalis, the world of the soul. So they're transjective. So we're talking about the transjective co-realization of different beings, including the soul, in the imaginal world. See what I mean? It becomes quite a lot quite quickly. So yeah, so obviously Viveki's episode 48 and 9 in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis are directly relevant about the divine double, where the soul is essentially an example or instance of a divine double. And these are the what we can start to, I mean, I would consider those two necessary watching before this because I'm going to start talking about angels and we have to understand that for me in the language of the divine double because otherwise it's too far out. Um, so these are figures, excuse me, that populate this between the world that's between ideas and things. Um, and the idea is that by taking up their perspectives and by relating with them, that we gain transformative knowledge of a kind that may be deeply necessary or important to us. Yeah, so in Islamic Gnosis, these figures are represented as quote eternal hexaeties. I have to Google that because I don't know what is a hexaety. It's taking a minute to find what that is. It's sort of from medieval Latin, I think. Yeah, it's a quality of thisness or uniqueness. Hex obviously is six in Greek, but the meaning is opposite. It's unique oneness. So yeah, so eternal. It's suchnesses, beings, uniquenesses. This is how these figures in the imaginal world are represented in Islamic gnosis. Yeah, so a divine double that we can enter into reciprocal relationship with, as per Viveki. Yeah, so it has a quality of guiding. So it says, so when I say angel, what we mean is the divine double, really. And this is how we're to understand this. This is how I'm understanding this language because otherwise it's completely inaccessible. And so I'm going to start saying angel, and that's so uncomfortable for me. But anyway, th this is where we've arrived somehow. So this angel or divine double is the archetype of each individual being, his invisible master or personal guide, Peredros. And so there's a way that it's kind of like the ideal or higher aspect of anything in some way. is a kind of guide. They kind of like the Platonic Eros who spans a chasm between the gods, the immortals, and the men. So Corbin's angels are images in of God's form, images of God's form that can like seen like there's a way of that we see the angels instead of seeing God. We're sort of able to see these figures in this imaginal realm, which is simply the realm inhabited by the soul, such that they're able to be grasped. Again, it gets quite arcane quite quickly. So in this context, Corbin draws attention to Deuteronomy 5:7. Quote, "You shall have no other gods before my face." Quote, "Yes, but what is this face? It could be a matter of that about which it said, you shall not see my face, for no man sees me and lives." Exodus 33:20. Yet it is precisely a matter of the face that God shows to man his theophany in the angel of the face and the angels of the face, and the angel of the face, all the angels of the face are his theophanies. These theophanies of which the transformations correspond to the state and mode of being of those to whom they're shown face to face. So there's a way that these angels or divine doubles are the revealed or visible aspect of God. So there's a way that this phrase, "you shall have no other gods before my face," comes to mean, "you shall have no other gods before my angel." What does this mean? We quote from David Miller. So this is Corbin's thoughts on angels. Quote, "So angel as image of something transcendent, here and now, maybe many things. It's a Hermetic word, herald, kerygma. I have to define what that means. Guide, connecting link, eros, the face of that which we face. Heart and mind at one in imagination. Alter ego, a mediator, the immediacy of soul, the power and form of being itself, the gods, self, God." Well, to me, again, not very clear. So I'm going to move on a little. We've been talking about what kind of what is the so the purpose of these figures inhabiting the imaginal world between ideas and things that we encounter when ensouling the world by participation in the world as our soul, by taking up the perspective of our soul. When we can do that, what is the purpose of like what happens when we encounter such figures, and why is that something that we should be concerned with at all? Well, it's through gnosis that such encounters occur, but it's also through such encounters that gnosis arises. And so they act as a bridge, they act as a pathway, they act as a visible, manifest, actual presentation of God. As the Sufi mystics repeatedly emphasize, we are wrestling not against, but for the angel, for our true self, the archetypal image by which we are made. To know oneself is to know one's angel. According to the Gnostic book of the Contender, he who has not known himself has known nothing, but he who has known himself has at the same time already achieved knowledge about the depth of the all. So Gnostic knowledge is knowledge of the soul. The aim isn't to the aim where the aim is actually to transform the soul. That means that Gnosis really has to do with depth psychology. It's a quite an ancient name for depth psychology. Again, from Jung, we would want to distinguish the angel from the true self. So we're understanding angel as divine double, which is similar to the anima in Jung, which is the soul. And this is the bridge, the mediating figure, the guide to the unconscious. And it's that unconscious which houses the self, this center of consciousness, which is between conscious and unconscious. So we wouldn't want to confuse our true self with the soul. The soul is a way to that self, at least according to Jung. And so we really like the cost there would be uh, if we conceive of the self, sorry, the soul as our true self, then that would lead to inflation and to or to animal possession or to other kind of dehumanizations. And so we want to be very careful to preserve a kind of independence between uh, the soul and the true self, at least Jung's self. There may be space there for exploring through the self the archetypal image by which we are made as distinct from the self as a new center of personality. But again, we need to get a sense for each of those. We now are allowed to move to page 14 of 18 in the introduction. So we now see that the imaginal world and imaginal practice and imagination as such are now drawn into the heart of psychology and psychotherapy, especially of the archetypal variety. So there's a way that the unconscious itself isn't invisible to us or not here somewhere else. It's identical with the imagination, actually, by imagining, by projecting our imagination, by inhabiting the imaginal world, by doing soul work, could reference Bill Plotkin in passing, we actually interact with, engage with the unconscious. Active imagination is the way that Jung did that. So therefore, Gnosis is about what's new. It's about participation in the depths of things. Well, the next link is drawn is that in archetypal psychology, the soul is conceived in a both an individual and personalistic dimension, but also macrocosmically as well as microcosmically, as in a collective or superpersonal aspect. And what I mean is the soul of the world, anima mundi. Quote, the curative or salvational vision of archetypal psychology focuses upon the soul in the world, which is also the soul of the world. Yeah, and so there's a kind of correspondence between the inner and outer world, or the self and the world. So the intrapsychic and the sort of extrapsychic, and between the individual and the collective, or the micro and macrocosmic aspects of the soul. There's correspondence between all of those. So I really consider those to be different aspects of the soul. So when we start to talk about the world soul, we're sort of talking about different facets, like each of our personalistic or individual aspects, or when we move deeper into our own individual soul, we sort of refine or polish the jewel that we are, that each of which is a facet in a far greater collective superpersonal jewel. Indra's net would be the appropriate image. Yeah, the Gnostic soul has a decidedly non-human orientation. It doesn't belong to man, but rather we belong to the soul or is in the soul. But we have to, again, be careful about that because we want to avoid anima possession here. Again, in Jung, it's by establishing a relationship of equality with the soul that we're able to create rather than be in a state of suffering. I, yeah, this is Jung from Psychological Types. I've done episodes in that series on Pandora and the rebirth of God that go into that in great depth, or at least some depth. Yeah, and so the soul isn't a substance, it's a perspective. It's a way of viewing things. And so it's also a way of seeing through. It's not about deconstruction, but it's a process of deepening or interiorizing. And the risk here is that th- there's a kind of erotic draw that I noticed toward romanticism, which is merely sensualizing or aestheticizing things in phenomenological terms. We're wanting to actually more deeply participate in the world. But it's also not a depth cult, you know? It's like it has qualities that link over with Zen Buddhism. It's also about simply what's here. And if we're always trying to get deeper and always trying to get deeper, then it's not very practical anymore. But we are moving from the more from the surface of visibility to the less visible or the less obvious. And we do that by becoming. It's by the transformation of the soul. It's a process that doesn't stop. It's an ongoing, aspirational, developmental, proleptic process. We can't really, there's a quote, you could not discover the limits of the soul, even if you traveled every road to do so. Such is the depth of its meaning. It doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end. As Heidegger would say, it's simply there. Yeah, I think the idea here would be that instead of having this deliberate intention to transform the soul, what if we simply conceived of this as getting to know the soul which is already there? Like, I think there's something uh, arrogant and presumptive about it's for the sake of transforming the soul, who is therefore seeming to be put in a position of lack or inadequacy in some way. Like, what if we could internalize the lack and say, what if it's about getting to know our own souls that are simply unveiled, unconcealed? Yeah, because they're saying here, sort of, this is Avens. What this implies is that the soul is something that has to be made. We have and we know our soul only on our way towards soul, which implies that gnosis, like depth psychology, is soul making. And so for me, this is a real disaster where communion is very different than construction. This is I'm wanting the model of the carpenter. I'm wanting to really steer away from that. So to me, it's a real, yeah, we need cultivation. We need organic development. Um, this is through Alan Watts, the Chinese is the quality of Li, I believe. Yeah, so to me, it wouldn't be about making soul. I would talk about revealing or unveiling soul, which is already there. But yeah, and it does matter because it's not the soul isn't a machine. You know, it's not something to be constructed or built. It really doesn't work that way. It's not a mentality of engineering will not help us. That's more or less all here. There's a little bit on Heidegger that mm, is a kind of again the quality of thinking. Yeah, where knowing is obviously knowing is inseparable from being, right? But it's a way of thinking that's not exactly counter to logic, but it does. Yeah, Heidegger's talking about a kind of use of the logos, which is behind Apollonian reason. There's a kind of unconscious irrationality. So we have to get out of conceiving things as objects and subjects. So according to Heidegger, objectivism is really a concealed form of subjectivism, where conceiving of things as objects implies referring them to an ego subject as its objects. This is a way of objectifying things. I think um, we can understand that Vivek is transjective. It's about co-transformation of self and world, by which we mean in this context, uh, the kind of existential knowledge that we access by taking upon the perspective of the soul, but also it's that like we can take up the perspective of the soul more deeply by finding that knowledge, but it's also from a condition of knowledge that we take up that perspective more deeply. So there's a kind of developmental aspirational loop that we're getting here that has to do with the relations between the soul and other inhabitants of the imaginal realm. We're hoping to explore a bit more of what gnosis, knowing by being, cultivation of the soul, and transformative knowledge mean as we move further into this. So transjective co-transformation between not just soul and world, but in this context also inner world and outer world, individual and collective aspects of the soul. That's almost all. So yeah, it's a way of thinking here, which is about a recollection of being. So it doesn't result in anything. It has no effect. It suffices its own essence in that it is, for it lets being be. Yeah, so this kind of it's a quality of deepening our participation in life. So if you want to get somewhere, it's about getting more here, you know. So this is why gnosis is identified with this salvational knowledge. It results in nothing, has no effect. Salvational, the verb to save in German retten, means basically to rid something of what impedes it from being itself. To rid something of what impedes it from being itself, to set it free to be what it is. It's perfect. Salvational knowledge. Free, the knowledge of freeing it into itself. So salvation results in nothing for the simple reason that it's not something to be acquired, and hell is one's possession. It's not a thing, but it's an event, it's an occurrence, gnosis, and it takes place in the soul. But that doesn't mean that we escape from the world into the soul. It's also the soul of the world and in the world. There's a necessity for participating more deeply, not asceticizing or romanticizing, holding at arm's length, participating more deeply. And so salvational knowledge is concerned with resouling the world. It's about a re-ensoulment of the world. And so it's about a recollection or a remembering of a worldly soul and an ensouled world, about living in a different way, but not to do anything, not to do nothing, to let the soul be. And to do that, we have to let the world be, let being be. So it's about clearing the way for the soul, really. That would be it was a little bit spotty in some places. I mean, it's quite philosophical and esoteric, but where we have some qualities to work with, and we'll start to try and like for me, this is all in the context of aspirational development. We're going to be applying this in group process, or I recommended this in other places in terms of an ecology of practices that come through being in the imaginal world. And so to me, all of this is understanding that it's going to be directly relevant to practice, to intentional practice. And to me, it's not just about there's a kind of risk here that for me this becomes quite philosophical. It's quite, and there's a kind of a sophisticated form of hedonism that is like a philosophical brand of enjoying life more deeply by reading these philosophical texts and moving through them. And it's this kind of like, it's the wine, it's the red wine of philosophy. You know what I mean? And it's like that's awesome, guys, but there's a meta crisis. It's kind of like to me, if imagine if you woke up in the Library of Alexandria and you could smell some smoke and there's someone next to you and the guy was like, "Hey, you should read this book. It's like a really good one." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." I just woke up though, and give me a minute. And the guy's like, "Yeah, okay, what about this one?" It's like awesome. It's like, you know, Robert Avens, the new Gnosis. You got to read this stuff, man. It's really cool. And I'm like, "Yeah, but do you smell the smoke?" And he's like, "Okay, you don't like that one. Like, try this third one." And I'm like, "The whole point is that the library's on fire." And yeah, only so much reading is going to help us. And yeah, drinking the red wine of philosophy is not going to help us either, I don't think. It's about taking this up, taking this into intentional practice. Um, yes, it has to be lived. Yes, we are talking about living more deeply, but I also think there's a quality of sort of getting our hands dirty and actually helping some people rather than just deepening into our own experience. Not that that's not important. Of course, it's important, but yeah, it can very easily be avoiding the reality. So being able to see the not only the brokenness of things, but the breaking quality. So I think it's by inhabiting in the perspective of our souls and by becoming in that place, becoming through gnosis, through transformation of the soul and of who we are, that we're actually able to cohere into sustainable community. And to me, isn't that the whole point? To me, it doesn't really seem meaningful. It doesn't seem that meaningful if um it's not viable. And I think it has to be viable in terms of community participation with situational awareness. I think the perspectives end up being very parochial. Um, Burying our head in the sand comes to mind. It can't be bread and circuses, you know what I mean? Um, but yeah, certainly depth of inner experience is part of the prescription. And I think we're getting there, complicated as it may be to begin. So Robert Avens, the new Gnosis, the introduction on the 12th right now of October 2025.